Hello and welcome to Desi Reads in Conversation. Today we're joined by a fantastic short fiction writer, Anita Goveas. Anita is British Asian, London based and fueled by strong coffee and paneer jalfrezi. And Anita has just had a book published, very exciting. It's a collection of short fiction and it's called Families and Other Natural Disasters and it's published by Reflex Press. Anita, congratulations. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Thank you for talking to me today.
My first question is, could you please tell us a bit more about yourself and how this lovely collection came about?
So I started writing about 5 years ago now. I was sort of changing jobs and had a little bit of time, and my husband suggested I do some courses that things I'd never had the chance to do before. I used to write when I was a teenager, but I stopped because basically no one in my family writes, and it was a bit of a, what are you writing about? Is it about us? You can't, other people can't read it. And I suppose I thought I didn't have anything interesting to say, but once I got going, I found that there was lots of things I wanted to say, and that's led to the collection, I guess.
Could you tell us a bit more about your process when it comes to form and structure and sort of playing with those things?
I think this playing with structure comes from not having had a formal writing background. I was a speech and language therapist. All the writing I did was reports, and I guess a lot of it was based on I didn't really know you couldn't do things, and no one had told me what I was supposed to be writing. And at first that was I felt a lot like I didn't know what I was doing, but I think that's probably quite not unusual for sort of someone starting to write in their 40s and not coming from a writing background, and also coming from, I suppose in some ways, I think my family are very supportive, but they're very supportive in certain lines. So at first writing, they were very suspicious of it, and they were very nervous of any mention of particularly grandmothers. They were very worried that my grandmother would sort of be worried that I really did think she kept sea serpents in the basement. And almost writing was sort of like a guilty form of expression. I tried very hard to write what I wanted to write, but I had this like censor in the basement, which is probably where the sea serpent in the basement idea comes from. That voice in your head of saying, is this going to embarrass anyone? What will my grandmother say? And it took me a while to be freer in my writing. I don't know if I still completely am. It's something I probably have to work on. And then I think that's why playing around with things like form and structure and language are appealing to me, because then writing becomes a form of freedom. So I think that's why I started to write so much flash fiction, because you can play around with structure a lot more. It has to be appealing to me, and I think having that sense of fun and experimentation helps me find the time to write.
You can certainly get that as a reader, how much you enjoy the form and how much you enjoy writing.
I think there was a lot of probably having had a lot repressed, and that once I got into the groove of it and found my voice, that comes out a lot more, that freedom of expression. And that was I think there was a couple of courses that did that for me, and it was becoming a writer course that they do, that Farhana Khalique does at the Asian Writer, where basically everybody on the course was like me. I didn't have to explain stuff, and I never realised how much I would do that. I'd have a whole paragraph and I'd just be like, I'm going to just take that line out then, because nobody knows what I'm talking about. But then in the Becoming the Writer group, everybody knew. And I was like, actually, maybe this is okay. Maybe I don't have to explain everything. Maybe and things like that. I could have conversations with other people on the Becoming a Writer course about things that I grew up with that made sense to them too, that I hadn't noticed didn't make sense to anyone else. And then Kathy Fish's Fast Flash is an online course of only flash fiction, and you get a prompt and you have to write your response to it and put it up in a group sort of space, group sharing space that day, and so you can't censor yourself. And I wrote one of the stories in the collection, the Let's Sing All the Swear Words We Know, which has a swear word in it, and I wanted to take that line out, and somebody in the group said, no, that's the best line, and it's the one that people and I wrote it because I wrote basically what was in my head down, and then once it was in the thing, I was like, oh, I can't do that, my nana is going to phone me, and they were like and obviously this is going to go on a website, but my mum did phone me about the swear word, so I wasn't wrong. It made me really think about how much I did that, how much I didn't write for myself. Still then, I've been writing 2 or 3 years by that point. I was still writing for the gaze of other people, and I do that much less now.
I'm glad you mentioned those things in terms of your influences, your family, even something as simple as food, and jewelry, and the ways we think about who is reading our stories, why are we writing, who is reading the stories, and if we have to shift our perspective, our voice to sort of accommodate or have to explain things that, fair enough, if people don't know, well, Google it, work it out from the context, if it was a French or Spanish word, or, would we be having this conversation? So I'm really glad you mentioned that, and certainly at Desi Reads, that's what we do, we want to represent,
If I wrote without, like, because I don't use a lot of Hindi, but the Hindi words that are interchangeable for me. Like, I remember trying to explain to somebody how to make dal, and I said, you have to bagar the fordni, and they looked at me like I'd grown another head, and then I was like, what happened? And they were like, well, you just went off into some other language. And I was like, okay. And then it took me like a whole, I don't know, it felt like a small book to explain what, to dry fry the spices. Those words are just part of how you make dal to me. That's what was told to me when I was taught, and this is how they make sense to me like that. So if I tried to take that stuff out, the words that I use, and then the idea that you can't just Google that, because I'd have to rethink my whole sentence. So it wouldn't feel right to me without some of the words that I do put in. And a lot of them are food words. It would be hard to not write like that, and I suppose then with the food comes the cultural bit. The food would always be Indian food. My family are from Mangalore, so they cook a particular kind of Indian food that you don't get. I get Goan food now, which is similar, but I've never gone to a restaurant in England where I could eat the food that I grew up with.
Yeah, I just love the way you write about identity and, different parts of the UK, different parts of India, and we leave the sort of literal world at several points, and we go, into outer space at one point. How important was that for you to do on a conscious level? Did it come sort of naturally in terms of writing about identity?
A lot of it was conscious. There's a couple of things going on in that. I very much think that as a writer, as a brown writer, I should be able to write about whatever I want to write about, but the characters are brown. So yes, if I want to write a story about going into outer space, that's great, but the characters are going to be brown. So there's going to be an element of that. So they're going to need butter chicken in space, and they're going to be talking about things that wouldn't necessarily occur to a non-brown character, but that's not the whole point that's not the point of the story. Their identity is a part of that. So that story was basically about grief and how that the woman dealt with grief. But then on the other hand, identity was a huge thing that I struggled with. So my parents took us back to, well, I was born here, but my parents took us back to Mumbai, where my family mostly live now, when myself and my brother were very small, on the expectation that we would move back. And then they brought us back. So all my earliest memories are of India, which are like being warm and sitting on a veranda in a swing. And they expected us to go back. That was always the plan. So I never felt English for a long time. They were told to stop speaking Hindi to me because the school felt it was interfering with my English. But otherwise I would have been, so I'm not bilingual because of that. I only speak a little bit of Hindi and some Konkani, which is the language of where my family are originally from, in Mangalore, which is more towards the south. And I grew up trying to figure out which one was which and which one I was supposed to be, because you could only be one of them. And then I was much older when I thought, actually I could be both. And then this other element came in where actually, yes, I'm Indian, but my family live in Mumbai, but we're from Mangalore. So actually all the things I was like are Indian. I'm Mangalorean, which is a very small place. And so that seemed to be a good way of expressing that. There's the British side of me and the Indian side of me. And I guess that's the thing. I'm a lot more comfortable with it now, but I guess I grew up with this idea that there was a type of Indian. So that, I guess I wasn't a proper Indian either. And I guess people over here as well expected me to be Hindu. And if I, sometimes if I said I'm Catholic, they'd get really confused. And there would be this idea that, I'd converted, and what was that like, being the Catholic in the family? And I'm like, so as far as I know, my family have been Catholic since the 1500s, when the Portuguese invaded, and that kind of stuff, where I just always felt a little bit odd and not maybe not Indian enough for people, but also not British enough. The times I feel Indian and the times I feel British, and can I make them work in one person? And I don't know.
Well, I do know that, at least that you do make it work, and it's a wonderful collection, and it showcases your talents, and it's really interesting, the themes you cover, and it's just an enjoyable read, and I love how strong all the stories are. It's such a wonderful collection to read and to reread, and we highly recommend it. It's called Families and Other Natural Disasters, and it's published by the wonderful Reflex Press. Thank you so much. That was fascinating and just a joy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the interesting questions. You made me think a lot about my book.
You're very welcome. And thank you guys for joining us. Thanks again, Anita, and congratulations again.
Thank you.